This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Ruling junta in Mali meets to discuss demands by regional bloc ECOWAS over transfer of power to a civilian rule. Countries in Africa step up efforts to contain the spread of the coronavirus. And Africa joins the world in mourning the demise of Black Panther actor Chadwick Boseman. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. Aliko Dangote, Africa's richest man, sets his eyes on an audacious oil refinery in Nigeria. And after months of closure due to the coronavirus pandemic, mosques reopen in Egypt. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. So good to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta. Let's begin in West Africa, where Mali's military junta is expected to hold talks with stakeholders in Bamako to discuss the list of demands by the economic community of West African states. The country's opposition leaders say they are disappointed by the conditions imposed by ECOWAS over transfer of power. The regional bloc told the coup leaders that they must transfer power to a civilian-led transitional government immediately and elections be held within a year.
International pressure has been mounting for the restoration of civilian rule in Mali, and this is what leaders of the economic community of West African states have now agreed upon.
It is decided that the civilian transition must take into account the following elements. 1. The nomination of a transitional president. This civilian person, recognized for their professional qualities, intellectual and moral integrity, will be in charge of leading the transition. The president of the transition will not be a candidate in the next presidential election. 2. The nomination of a civilian prime minister and head of state, recognized for his or her professional qualities and his or her intellectual and moral integrity. This prime minister also will not be a candidate in the next presidential election.
But opposition players in Mali have a different opinion.
No, it is incomprehensible, and it is a bad assessment of the situation. ECOWAS needs to revise its position and to understand that we are not against a 3-year transition. We are not opposed to having a military or a civilian in charge. We know that soldiers are Malians and that there are some civilians who are worse than the military. And there are some very good soldiers who can be better than civilians. The question today is not about Mali needing a civilian or a soldier, but it needs a statesman.
We don't understand the position of the international community as expressed via ECOWAS. But regardless, we believe that we must respect Malians in an inclusive manner in order to decide on what is acceptable and to join us in this process, and not to believe that ECOWAS must decide what is good and what is bad for Mali.
The regional bloc argues that no military structure should transcend the transitional president. Should the leaders of the coup agree to the demands, then ECOWAS says it would gradually lift imposed sanctions. The bloc suspended Mali from its institutions, shut borders, and halted financial flows with the country, following the ouster of President Boubacar Keïta. The soldiers behind the coup want the sanctions lifted, and as a gesture of goodwill, released Keïta on Thursday.
I do not believe that we need to fix a deadline before we can identify what needs to be done. It would be more rational, more reassuring to establish the tasks for the transition. But to proceed by fixing dates without taking account of the tasks that need to be achieved seems to me to be slightly arbitrary.
An ordinary ECOWAS summit is slated for the 7th of September to review the progress in Mali. In the meantime, some sources say the transition period could be extended for a couple of months to accommodate the rainy season. Chao Mhono, CGTN.
Well, for the very latest on the developments in Mali, we are now joined via Skype by Mamadou Tafili. He is a journalist based in the country's capital, Bamako. Mamadou, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. Mali's military junta is expected to hold talks with stakeholders in Bamako in response to demands by ECOWAS. What is the latest on this, Mamadou?
Yes, thank you very much. The latest on this is actually the response their reactions to the ECOWAS. Yesterday, that's when the ECOWAS have led their positions concerning the position to the soldiers on which way they have to set up the transitions. But the stakeholders have gathered yesterday to remind the soldiers that they should come together. As they have said, they have to come to an inclusive, calling all the forces of the nations together and to make and to elaborate an act or a constitution or to see how they're going to run transition. But what they realized yesterday is the soldiers has already made a fundamental act, like a kind of constitution which they already elaborated. And those stakeholders gathered yesterday because to show an unhappiness of what the soldiers have been done, because they think that they did it by themselves, So that's what after that, directly after these reactions of the stakeholders, the soldiers of the CNSP groups also called the population together today at the CGTN. CGTN is the palace of the cultural center where they convoy all the populations to have to hold a meeting today. So which will be took place at 11 of this time.
All right, Mamadou, thank you for that update. Let's zero in on ECOWAS now. The West African regional leaders are insisting on a one-year civilian-led transitional government before elections are held. Are we likely to see this happening?
Actually, it's it's a kind of is a question of pressures because militaries are making kind of a couple of compromises with the ECOWAS, so how they can get solutions out of this crisis. But ECOWAS is insisting on 1 year and the civilians on the head of the transition, while the military, firstly, was not their will. That's what they wished first, and the population was kind of backing them and to support them on this way. If Mali really need like 2 years or 3 years, they are ready to support them. But actually, the sanctions of the ECOWAS sanction concerning the economic situations will make things more harder for the military to face all the different problems that the country is facing. In this case, so I think that they should still make other compromises with ECOWAS to see how they can find a better solutions. But 1 year is still depends on the reaction, will be depending on the reaction of the populations and during the meeting which will take place just this 11 o'clock now.
All right, Mamadou Tafili, thank you for your insight and analysis. Thank you very much. That's Mamadou Tafili speaking to us live from Bamako. Let's move on. Earlier, we sought views about the political situation in Mali from Achike Chude. The African affairs analyst says the release of the ousted leader is a win for the regional bloc, ECOWAS.
I guess that one of the major demands of the ECOWAS is the safety of Abubakar Keita and then members of his government. And I think that fundamental desire has been achieved. He has been released, and they have also not given him conditions that are impossible to fulfill. He can be allowed to travel if he wants to travel. So I think that is also, that has been quite fundamental. So Mali is actually not in a position to look the ECOWAS, eyeball to eyeball and refuse every entreaty or every demand that the regional body makes on the coupists. They are not exactly in a position. But I think the dilemma, finally, that the ECOWAS has to contend with is the fact that Keita might not come back to power again because of the overwhelming, support that the coupists have, regardless of how abominable the coup itself is. But the reality is that the people have responded with joy. at the outset of Keita. So that makes it very difficult for ECOWAS to insist on restating Keita. So there has to be an agreement somewhere. One is the fact that the coupists will not be allowed to remain in power for 3 years.
And now to our continuing coverage of the coronavirus pandemic. Tunisia's Ministry of Health has made the wearing of face masks mandatory throughout the North African nation. People who fail to observe the new regulation will have to pay fines ranging between $300 and $1,600 or even serve time in jail. Authorities could also double the fine for repeat offenders. CGTN's Adnan Shawashi has more details.
The decision to make the wearing of face masks compulsory follows an increase in the number of coronavirus infections in the country. Tunisia's health minister says the COVID-19 task force will enforce the new requirement.
The new law grants judges judicial discretion. Offenders will be fined by law enforcing agents and courts. They could also be sentenced to jail terms. This period could go up to 6 months. The state's goal is not to put people in jail. It's rather to convince offenders to wear face masks.
The director of the National Observatory for New and Emerging Diseases noted that the emergence of new hotspots in 6 different regions is due to failure to comply with sector-specific health protocols and guidelines, mainly wearing face masks in public places.
People do not wear face masks in the streets and in public transport. They do not respect the health protocol. They still gather at marriages, family celebrations in public spaces without abiding by social distancing. This behavior will only lead to a surge in the number of infections.
Many Tunisians have welcomed the decision of the health ministry.
I think that offenders must be fined even if the penalties are high. The fine is more than 1 month's salary. That's how people will respect the prevention measures. Otherwise, only some people will wear the face masks, especially in public transport.
The number of COVID-19 deaths in Tunisia since the outbreak began in March reached 71. Most of those who succumbed to the coronavirus suffered from chronic diseases and had an average age of 69. With the reopening of borders on June 27th, Tunisia reported 500 imported cases. The Minister of Health stressed the importance of wearing face masks, washing hands regularly, and abiding by social distancing and self-isolation protocol to contain the spread of the virus. Adnan Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
Meanwhile, Somalia is considered one of the rare countries where many of the COVID-19 rules do not strictly apply. This is despite the government's attempt to impose the directives. The government has eventually chosen not to be strict on observance of restrictions, a decision informed by a recent decrease in daily COVID-19 infections. Many residents have also decided to adopt a new normal, but differences abound among locals over the threat posed by COVID-19.
I'm still wearing a face mask. What forced me to wear a face mask is that I still believe that the coronavirus is in Somalia. I want to protect myself from contracting the disease. Looking at how people around the world are dying from the coronavirus, I decided to protect myself wearing a face mask. I believe everyone should wear one.
I believe there's no coronavirus. The awareness campaigns have reduced. People stopped wearing masks and gloves. The government doesn't exaggerate about the disease anymore. I believe corona cases have also reduced.
Egypt has, for the first time since March, allowed mosques to hold Congressional Friday prayers. The weekly Islamic service usually sees millions of Muslims gather in mosques across the country. The decision was welcomed by worshippers who had to observe strict COVID-19 preventive measures. CGTN's Adel Al-Mahroui has that story.
For 5 months, the call for Friday prayer in Egypt has been ending with the phrase, "Pray at home," said in Arabic. This is the first time Egyptians have heard the usual call asking them to attend the weekly joint prayer.
For 70 years, I've never missed a Friday prayer. The pandemic made me, for the first time in my life, miss it. It was a painful experience. The preventative measures are perfectly applied here. I feel safe and I see the effort done to protect the worshippers from any infection.
The Egyptian government has made the wearing of face masks mandatory for all worshippers. Each person had to bring his own prayer mat too. People were also required to maintain a distance of at least 1 meter between them in all directions, and no physical greeting or contact was allowed. Despite all these restrictive measures, many were happy to attend their first Friday prayer since March.
Friday is always a festive day. It's like Eid. Now imagine how much Muslims have been anticipating that day. The resumption of Friday prayers make it more special. We thank God the mosques are once again welcoming worshippers on Friday. We hope we can overcome the pandemic so we can return to normal life.
The people are very excited to come. The scenes reminded us of the Hajj, where people arrive early looking forward to the prayers, and everyone wants to guarantee finding a spot inside the mosque. It is a great feeling to be back. I had missed coming to Al-Aqsa Mosque.
The mosques have only been reopened for prayers. Other services like weddings or funerals are still prohibited. Bathrooms and washing areas also remain closed to the public.
The Friday prayer is the biggest weekly gathering at mosques. Egypt resumes this service at a time its COVID-19 daily infections are bouncing back from their lowest rates in months. And with the government warning about the second wave, many fear that it might not be long before the pandemic forces mosques to once again shut down. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
In Kenya, a public university is awaiting approval to begin trials of its locally designed respirator. Students from different disciplines teamed up earlier this year to assemble the device. The ventilator is expected to help address the shortage of equipment needed to treat serious cases of COVID-19.
This device is for now known as Tibavent. It has successfully undergone quality testing under the watch of institutions set up by the Kenyan government. The team working on the prototype is awaiting approval from Kenya's Ethics Review Committee, which looks into the safety of any equipment. Clinical trials are expected to begin soon after.
Indeed, these efforts are to be applauded because mechanical ventilation is a cornerstone in management of severe pneumonia, especially that caused by COVID-19. If these machines are eventually approved by KEBS and mass-produced, they'll go a long way in alleviating not only COVID-19 pneumonia, but pneumonia caused by other infectious agents.
So far, there are 3 educational institutions in Kenya racing to mass-produce locally assembled respirators. The students from Kenyatta University conceived their idea in March.
Currently, we only know there are about 270 ICU beds within the country, and not all of them are possibly equipped with ventilators. Some probably shall. It is with this in mind that we have set up a production unit that should be able to do roughly about 50 ventilators per week.
The current shortage of ventilators has inspired the students to develop their own at a much lower price.
A ventilator, if you look at it, is not majorly also only for COVID, it's also post-COVID, because even after COVID, a ventilator, the cheapest one used to cost 3 million before even taxing. So in import, it comes around 4.5 M. But having Kenya produce its own ventilators for a cost of less than that, 2 million is still something. So it may not only be for COVID, also for other diseases which are respiratory.
The model is expected to go a long way in assisting Kenya to deal with severe cases of the coronavirus.
A lot of patients require these machines for oxygenation. And unfortunately, they are not enough to go around. And once one patient is hooked up to one, it can take as long as 2 weeks before they come out. And some even stay longer on these machines. So there has to be sufficient numbers for not only ICU beds, but also mechanical ventilators and monitors.
Once authorized, the team has the capacity to produce up to 50 respirators a week. Jane Keo, CGTN.
Further afield, researchers for the first time identified a case of COVID-19 reinfection in the United States. A 25-year-old man living in Reno, Nevada, tested positive in April after showing mild symptoms. He developed a more severe infection in late May. Scientists in Nevada have published their research online, but it has not yet been peer-reviewed. Reinfections have also been identified in Hong Kong and Europe. The U.S. saw 40,000 new cases on Friday, bringing total infections to nearly 6 million, with over 181,000 deaths. France is seeing another surge in cases. It reported more than 7,300 new infections on Friday. It just 200 shy of a record set in March during the peak of the first wave. Health officials are raising warnings as concerns grow, with more than 12 million children returning to school next week, most for the first time in more than 5 months. You're watching Africa Live. Time now for a short break. Still ahead on the program. Japan's ruling party begins the process of selecting a new prime minister after Shinzo Abe's resignation. And Africa joins the world in mourning the demise of Black Panther actor Chadwick Boseman.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Thanks for staying with us. Japan's ruling party is beginning the process of selecting a new prime minister, one day after Shinzo Abe announced he is stepping down. The Liberal Democratic Party is expected to make an official decision at a meeting on Tuesday. On Friday, Abe said he was resigning because of health reasons. He suffers from a recurring bowel disease which forced him to cut short his term in office in 2007. He is Japan's longest-serving prime minister, nearly 8 years in office. Leaders from all over the world sent their well wishes to Abe, including U.S. President Donald Trump, who calls him a great friend. The bombshell development is ending Abe's record-breaking political tenure. CGTN's Zhang Dan looks at the issues facing Japan at this moment.
Abe's resignation comes as Japan is facing many challenges, the most pressing being the coronavirus pandemic. The country registered over 800 new cases on Friday, bringing total infections to over 66,000. And another issue, the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. The Games have been postponed for a year as the country struggled to contain the virus. But despite the end of his tenure, Abe says Japan will remain committed to its role as host.
We will continue with preparations and fulfill responsibilities as the host nation. Of course, my successor will aim likewise with the same thoughts to make it happen. There are many things that needs to be done.
Aside from global pandemic, Abe's successor will also have to take up the mantle of the economic policy that bears his name, Abenomics. Based on 3 arrows of monetary easing, fiscal stimulus, and structural reforms, the scheme aims to revive Japan's decades-long stalled economy. While some progress has been made, the bigger structural problems remain. The economy has swung into reverse even before the coronavirus crisis wiped out remaining gains. On the international stage, Abe continued to stress the importance of the Japan-US alliance, even as he steadily increased Japan's defense arsenal, trying to reduce its reliance on the US military. Abe also tried to build stronger trade cooperation with China and another free trade agreement in the Asia-Pacific, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Looking at Japan's other Asian neighbors, relations with South Korea soured last year due to unresolved disputes over wartime forced labor, and no progress has been made with Russia in resolving a long-standing territorial dispute over Northern Islands. With a stagnant economy, unresolved issues with neighbors, and weakening relations with the U.S., Japanese media say Abe's successor might be drawing the short straw. Zhang Dan, CGTN.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has met with French President Emmanuel Macron. The Chinese diplomat is there to deepen ties with France, stressing the importance of restarting exchanges while controlling the coronavirus. Wang also suggested stepping up cooperation on developing a vaccine. France is the fourth stop on his five-country tour to boost relations with Europe. It's already taken him to Italy, the Netherlands, and Norway, and will end in Germany. Our reporter, Tony Waterman, has more.
France and China have a long history, but this trip is about the future. What is that relationship going to look like post-pandemic? China would like to see an even closer partnership. So Foreign Minister Wang Yi is trying to reassure France that Chinese investment is still a good thing, as regulations are making it more difficult for Chinese money to flow into France. He also wants to reassure French businesses that China should remain their manufacturing hub after mass supply chain disruptions during the coronavirus pandemic led to calls for production to be brought closer to home. During his three-day stopover, Wang Yi will also meet with the French foreign minister, where the outstanding EU-China investment deal is expected to be discussed. The goal is to get that wrapped up, perhaps at a September 14th virtual summit, so that it can be signed by the end of this year. But there are some remaining issues for France and for Europe, including market access, reciprocity, and state subsidies. From China's perspective, addressing the 5G issue is paramount. Last month, French authorities said they would not renew licenses for Huawei equipment. This will essentially phase the company out of France's 5G network by 2028. And this is something, of course, that China does not want to see happen. Now, Paris may be the fourth stop in his five-country European tour, but Wang Yi is spending the most amount of time here, and this is for good reason. France is the EU's second largest economy. Emmanuel Macron is one of the most influential leaders in Europe, second only to German Chancellor Angela Merkel, with whom Wang Yi is expected to meet with early next week. So spending more time here, making a strong case about deepening cooperation, about multilateralism, about decision-making independent of U.S. influence, could help steer not just France's relationship with China, but the entire bloc's relationship with China, and strengthening China's relationship with Europe at a time when Beijing-Washington relations are so fraught is key. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Paris.
Tens of thousands of people gathered in Washington, D.C. to mark a historic civil rights march nearly 60 years ago. Those calls to end racism carry special resonance today, with families of people killed by police making emotional calls for action. Owen Fairclough reports from Washington.
57 years ago today, 250,000 people gathered in this very spot, the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., to witness Martin Luther King deliver his I Have a Dream speech. And if those iconic words helped African Americans achieve civil rights, thousands of them are back here today to tell the U.S. government that not enough has changed.
We're going to hold court today. We're going to hold court on systematic racism. We're going to have court right now. Guilty.
Among them, the family of Jacob Blake, the latest African American to be shot by a white police officer, and the family of George Floyd, whose death early this summer triggered a long overdue reckoning with racial injustice.
As of now, everybody out here right now, our leaders, they need to follow us while we're marching to enact laws to protect us.
And this event, attended by Martin Luther King's son,
we will complete the work so boldly began in the 1960s,
took place just hours after Donald Trump ended the Republican National Convention at the White House, telling voters why he deserved another term.
And this election will decide whether we will defend the American way of life or whether we will allow a radical movement to completely dismantle and destroy it.
And Republicans at that convention focused on law and order, specifically prosecuting the small minority of people who've broken the law at protests like this. And barely a word said about the long-standing grievances articulated by the overwhelming majority of peaceful protesters. But they're here to tell Donald Trump and the US government their voice will be heard. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
Actor Chadwick Boseman, best known for his lead role in the film Black Panther, has died at age 43. Boseman was diagnosed with colon cancer 4 years ago, according to his social media accounts. Joy Karuki with the details.
The death of Chadwick Boseman has come as a shock to many movie lovers. Boseman, a native of South Carolina, passed away at his home with his wife and family at his side, according to his social media accounts. He endeared the hearts of many in 2018 for his role as King T'Challa in the film Black Panther. During his screen career, he played a number of real-life characters famed for breaking racial barriers in America. Movies he starred in include Get On Up, Marshall, and baseball pioneer Jackie Robinson in 42.
Ladies and gentlemen,
I don't even have to have hopes. I know what it means to see somebody that looks like you and play the hero and the villain, and have the freedom to be both things. So that's a beautiful thing, because it frees the human spirit. The key thing as an actor is to not judge the characters that you play. That's how you can play them and actually have compassion on them. So to be able to sit through this movie and go through that inner conflict, it frees up everyone, not just young black men and women, but people of all races.
Black Panther became one of the highest grossing films in 2018 and was nominated for 6 Oscars. The movie won 3 Academy Awards in the Best Original Score, Best Costume Design and Best Production Design categories. The statement on his social media platforms says Boseman was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer in 2016 and the disease ultimately progressed to stage 4. A movie star who will be greatly missed. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
Let's now remind you of our top stories. Mali's military junta is expected to hold talks with stakeholders in Bamako to discuss the list of demands by the Economic Community of West African States. The regional bloc wants the coup leaders to transfer power to a civilian-led transitional government immediately and elections to be held within a year. Tunisia's Ministry of Health has made the wearing of masks mandatory throughout the North African nation. People who fail to observe the new regulation will have to pay fines ranging between $300 and $1,600 or even serve time in jail. Authorities could also double the fine for repeat offenders. And Japan's ruling party is beginning the process of selecting a new prime minister 1 day after Shinzo Abe announced he is stepping down. The Liberal Democratic Party is expected to make an official decision at a meeting on Tuesday. On Friday, Abe said he was resigning because of health reasons. Well, we have a lot more news coming your way. Don't go away. Business News is up next. Here's a look at the headlines. Aliko Dangote, Africa's richest man, sets his eyes on an audacious oil refinery in Nigeria.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are 2 of the major cities I grew up in. Business in Africa is high risk. After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives, from the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Thanks for staying with us. Thanks for tuning in. Nigeria might fall into recession in the third quarter of this year due to the impact of low prices and the coronavirus pandemic. The head of the country's budget office, Ben Akubweze, says it is expected that growth in the third quarter would be negative. It would be the second quarter of negative growth after the economy contracted by 6% in the second quarter of the year. The continent's top oil producer faces its worst economic crisis in 4 decades in the wake of an oil price war between Russia and Saudi Arabia at the start of the year, and, of course, the pandemic, which hurt demand for its main export commodity, which provides 90% of foreign exchange earnings. Africa's richest man, according to Forbes magazine, Aliko Dangote, plans to spend more than his net worth of $13.5 billion building one of the world's biggest oil refineries in Nigeria. This move has the potential to revolutionize Nigeria's economy, with its operations adding $13 billion or 2.3% to gross domestic product. Central Bank Governor Godwin Emefiele has said that the project could employ more than 70,000 people when operational. Nigeria's largest ever industrial project boasts a distillation column of separating crude into various fuels at different temperatures that is the largest of its kind in the world. The 650,000 barrel per day refinery is just part of a $15 billion petrochemical complex that will also house a gas processor and the world's biggest plant for ammonia and urea, which are used in making plastics and fertilizers. Kenya Airways expects passenger and cargo traffic to get back to 2019 levels in 2024, and that's according to the airline's chairman, Michael Joseph. The airline reported a near 50% decline in income to $279 million for the first half of the 2020 fiscal year. Its operating loss rose by nearly 4 times to $77 million. The pre-tax loss of the 6 months rose by over 160% to $195 million. At least 31% of these are losses attributable to hedges on leases and credit facilities. The airlines was grounded for most of the second quarter of the year as countries closed their airspace to slow down the spread of COVID-19. Consequently, passenger traffic fell by 55% to 1.1 million passengers, and cargo volumes fell by just under 30% to just over 22,000 tons. Kenya Airways is still locked out from the Tanzanian market. The COVID-19 pandemic has created multiple shocks to supply chains and pushed for food prices upwards, but the crisis has, on the upside, accelerated the progress of investment in agriculture by Africa's youth. With prospects of formal employment further eroded, agriculture is turning out to be a key source of employment for the youth. From Tunisia, here is Adnan Shawashi with more details.
Brahim Trabilsi is a farmer in Tunisia's northeastern region of Manouba. Amid the outbreak of the deadly pandemic, which interrupted economic activities in the North African nation, Trabilsi was among the farmers that toiled through the crisis to ensure there was no shortage of food by accelerating production of fruits and vegetables.
All sectors are affected by the coronavirus crisis. Young farmers worked hard despite the high risk of infection. They turned their focus on cultivating land and provided agricultural produce for millions of Tunisians who were confined at home during the lockdown.
During the peak of the crisis, the landowner did not leave his farm. For more than 2 months, he worked for 18 hours a day to boost its production and revenues.
The production, transport and distribution cost was up 20% during the pandemic. This did not deter us from waking up early to work. At the same time, many unemployed youth looked at agriculture as a job to earn a decent living and source of food.
The Agriculture and Food Security Committee at the Tunisian Parliament has urged the government to support thousands of youths who are working in the agricultural fields.
The agricultural sector contributes around 14% of Tunisia's GDP. It employs some 50,000 people. Unlike other sectors, the coronavirus pandemic did not paralyze agriculture. The distribution continued and all the agricultural produce was available. Young farmers seized the opportunity to grow in this period. Our role is to support them.
During a recent visit to the region of Jandouba, northwest of Tunisia, President Kais Saied thanked the local farmers for ensuring supply chains were not affected. The head of state said that agricultural workers, especially women, made significant sacrifices during the health crisis to ensure that production is not interrupted throughout the country. Agriculture is one of the main pillars of the Tunisian economy. It is one of the few vital sectors which remained active since March 2020. In fact, local agricultural production and distribution channels were not affected negatively by the pandemic. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
A group of South African animators are on a mission to save the planet. The young creatives have come up with a game called Doba Dash, based on the real-life stories of local waste pickers who are commonly referred to as street surfers. Trash collectors earn very little and live in abject poverty, but their contribution in keeping waste out of the environment is crucial. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
Street surfers dashing around with their trolleys collecting trash is unique to South Africa. They keep 80 tons of paper and plastic out of oceans and landfill sites. A heroic effort that inspired young game developer Thabo Tsolo to create Dopa Dash.
The game is a combat racing game similar to Mario Kart. So what you do is you assume the role of a street surfer and you race around the city collecting trash, and the trash counts as points within the game and also as a weapon system. For example, a paper, you can use it as a paper plane, which is a tracking missile, and it hits the other players, and all of that you're doing it just so you can be number one in the race and collect all the trash.
Global warming is one of this century's biggest environmental challenges. The team are hoping the use of augmented reality will make the game fun and encourage South Africans to take recycling more seriously.
So we have plans to develop the game to such a place that literally you have an app on your phone that you can go and scan trash that you may find on the street or in your home. You scan the barcode and then you scan also you throwing it away. And from that, already now we're incentivizing recycling and we're teaching a behavior.
Space Salad Studios plan to take its creation global, but it may be tough competing against popular applications such as Subway Surfers and Minion Rush.
The story about recycling just gives us an advantage over these other games, you know. The games are just fun, you know. There's no deeper meaning or story, you know. Like, I feel the advantage that we have over these games and how we stand to compete against these games is people are actively taking a change in preserving the future of their planet.
We have such rich stories, rich characters. It's not simply just, you know, taking a representation and putting a person on the card. Even the stories of the characters are so rich. So we know that that is going to hit a nerve with anyone who may not know about this culture. And it's a little bit of a peephole into what we experience here in South Africa.
Dopa Dash will get its big break later this year when it's put to the test by South Africans at Comic-Con Africa. Julie Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
The news continues on Africa Live. We've got a lot more stories coming your way, including Nigerian company deploys telemedicine technology to enable safe doctor and patient interaction during the coronavirus pandemic.
Vikash Purma is a scuba diving instructor on the island of Mauritius.
When you go underwater, you are living the actual moment. Because when you're down there, you're not in contact with whatever trouble you've got, whatever is there.
He is a popular teacher with locals, as well as with international visitors. For Vikash, the underwater world is a place where everyone is equal. Yet he finds that society itself is not always perfect.
No one is better than A, B, or C.
I don't say that's one. I say that's the reality.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Many people in Nigeria, as in other countries nowadays, avoid visiting hospitals for fear of contracting the coronavirus. Health workers, too, are wary of attending to patients over similar concerns. But an indigenous tech health company in the West African nation is helping health workers and patients interact safely. CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam has that story.
Yvonne Ndukwe has been dealing with bouts of malaria, but visiting a hospital for treatment hasn't been an option since the coronavirus outbreak. She recently got an alternative, a telemedicine platform that enables her to communicate with a doctor. The platform also links her with a pharmacy around her neighborhood from where she gets her drugs, and the service costs about $2 monthly.
I registered with 3,000 naira for 3 months, and I mean that is really affordable. Imagine for the next 3 months I get access to malaria test and treatment, and then I also get an opportunity to chat with the doctors.
We receive prescriptions for patients who have visited an online doctor. Then we fill the prescriptions and ensure that the drugs that we give the clients or the patients or customer is exactly what was prescribed, and we tell them how to take it.
The platform also covers chronic health conditions.
What happens is we have this set of symptoms. We have an algorithm that we use. We have an algorithm that we follow depending on what the patient complains about. And with this, we're able to make a diagnosis. Now, if the complaints they have are not one of the diagnoses covered by the telemedicine app, maybe it's one of those that would need a specialist recommendation. We offer them a referral template, like a referral letter, which they can take to another facility or a clinic.
The platform is the brainchild of health tech firm Wella Health, alongside its health insurance partner, Reliance. It's a pathway that's helping thousands of Nigerians access quality health care from the comfort of their homes. The partnership has served over 4,000 patients since it was launched some 50 days ago.
So it's really simple to use. It's just the same way you can chat with your friend or your colleagues at work. Just pick up your phone and talk to them via text messaging. For people who aren't technologically savvy or do not have a smartphone, we also have the facility to connect you via voice to a doctor. There's value for everybody involved. There's value for the patient. They don't have to go to a hospital. They don't have to wait on long queues. They just talk to a doctor, pick up their medications.
The telemedicine app was launched in the height of the pandemic. Because of the lockdown, people could not go out. People were scared. A lot of people had this panic about the pandemic, and hospitals were also very, very cautious about who comes into the clinic and who they attend to. So at that period, we were able to provide maximum value to all our users to minimize the number of hospital visits that happened in that period.
Nigeria's fragile healthcare system has been badly affected by the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. Reports from the Bureau of Statistics show that about 82 million people live below the poverty line of $1 per day. That's about 40% of the country's population. Now, the telemedicine platform seeks to increase access to healthcare for middle to low-income earners. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
And now, here's our daily highlight of our continuing digital safari series in the Masai Mara. Today, we look at the wildebeest crossing the river as other wild animals explore the game reserve.
Yesterday on CGTN's Digital Safari, in the Masai Mara, wildebeest were seen in large numbers in the distance, giving us hope for a crossing later that day. On the other side of the river, a pod of hippos relaxed on the riverbank, unexpectedly in the company of some very chilled crocodiles. A naive baby hippo used a crocodile as a headrest. A herd of elephants found themselves to be sharing their breakfast table with some sleepy lionesses. One of the matriarchs was not too happy about this. But the young bulls were oblivious as they practiced their fighting skills. Meanwhile, in South Africa, Steve came across a black-backed jackal as it was enjoying a scrub hare for breakfast. Things were much more peaceful elsewhere in Djuma, as an elephant bull, despite being in muffs, calmly went about his day. In Gala, the Birmingham Pride soaked up the sun as the cubs played with their father's mane. But we were reminded that survival is key in the wild. As a female cheetah rested her eyes in the long grasses of Pinda, never fully succumbing to the slumber, and always keeping a watchful eye out for impending threats. Join us every day at 4:30 a.m. GMT on CGTN digital platforms for your very own virtual safari through the African wild.
We've got your sports news coming up. Stick with us. Here's a look at the headline. Changes ringed at South Africa cricket CEO tossed out for misconduct.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to Sport on Africa Live. Let's start with cricket, where South African cricket's governing body has sacked its chief executive, Thabang Morowe, for what it says were acts of serious misconduct. Cricket South Africa says the decision was based on legal advice after an independent investigation. Morowe was initially suspended in December over the allegations. In a statement, Cricket South Africa said Morowe had sufficient opportunity to make representations to the CSA board, which he failed and refused to utilize. Acting Chief Executive Kugandri Govender is to continue in the role until a permanent replacement is appointed. Now, Red Bull's Max Verstappen topped the practice timesheets for the Belgian Formula One Grand Prix on Friday ahead of Renault.